It's The Lit Show with Jeremy Fee. New episode each Tuesday. Authors welcome, comments encouraged. Hello everyone, welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. As always, I've got something special for you today. It's my August 2022 book battle wrap-up. Here in the room, I've got both of my cats, Daxter and Jack, hanging out. And I want to go ahead and apologize if I sound like I've got a frog in my throat. I do have a sore throat I've been fighting off for several days now. This month I read 15 books. A lot of that was audio books, and a little bit may seem like I'm cheating a little bit because I've got a short story collection on there that I've been reading for a couple years now and just managed to finish. But let's get to it. Look at the books that I read for the month. Which book are you rooting for? Which book do you think could win as my best read of the month? I love doing these book battle wrap-ups. It forces me to compare the books and talk about them in ways that I probably wouldn't talk about them if I was just talking about them one-on-one. If you were to ask me how good my reading month was, I would answer it was all right. It was a pretty good reading month for me in August. With no further ado, here we go. For the prelims round, I have been participating in Book Trek 2020 as well as August of Adventures. Both of those readathons have been really nice. I've enjoyed them. Thank you to the people who created them. Thank you to the various hosts online who've talked about them throughout the month. We're going to start out with a book I read for the Book Trek 2022 bonus challenge, which was to read some sort of non-fiction science book. I picked up The Radium Girls by Kate Moore. This book as non-fiction was so sad. It is just such a horrible tragedy what happened to these women. It is up against a book I read for Book Trek 2022, the autobiography of James T. Kirk. I love these fake autobiographies. The only complication is with Trek lore, the fact that sometimes it might seem to be inconsistent with some of what the TV shows or movies have told us. But that's perfectly fine. In this first pair-up, I'm going to give the win to Radium Girls. It's a very serious book. I believe it deserves to be treated seriously. The next pair-up is a BookTube Spin 7 winner for me, as well as a book that I read for August of Adventures. It's The Legends of River Song, a book from the Doctor Who universe. River Song is one of my favorite characters. She and the Doctor have a romantic life, but they encounter each other basically backwards in each other's timelines, which is really fascinating as a romance story and just in general as a relationship issue for characters to deal with. This book had various short stories essentially of River having different adventures, some of which featured the Doctor and some that didn't. It is paired up against another book I read for Book Trek 2022, but also a book I just wanted to read in general, the Star Trek Deep Space Nine anthology, Prophecy and Change. The big story that stands out from this collection is a story about Mr. Garrick by Andrew Robinson, the actor who played the character and also wrote the highly successful novel A Stitch in Time. Out of this pairing, I'm going to go with the Deep Space Nine anthology. I really enjoyed the story about Mr. Garrick there, pretty much at the end of the book. In our next bracket, we've got a pairing from a BookTube Spin 7 winner again, as well as August of Adventures book. I read Monster Huntress by David Wiley. I wanted to get around to reading this one anyway, because David Wiley is a great member of the community here on BookTube. I want to say AuthorTube as well, because he's an author. He has talked on his channel about how he may start talking more about author issues, in addition to talking about his reading and books. I really enjoyed Monster Huntress. It's a really interesting story. I don't think it's spoilers to say at the very beginning, you've got a situation where the previous generation Monster Huntress dies and her daughter basically has to take up the mantle of fighting the monsters. You've got basically a young adult adventure story. but it reads like classic fiction. I am pairing it up against A Merchant in Orient and Other Stories by David Wiley. And you may be thinking, Jeremy Fee, didn't you already read A Merchant in Orient by David Wiley? And I did. I read the novella version, but this is an anthology with other works by David Wiley in it as well. I figured it's a good time to go ahead and read those other stories. Of the two, even though I really enjoy A Merchant in Orient as a novella, I'm going with Monster Huntress as a complete book. It's a great work. So that's that's going to advance to the next level. And then we've got a pairing for August of Adventures. I finally finished the short story collection Rogues by George R. R. Martin. If you are a fan of Patrick Rothfuss with the Kingkiller Chronicle, or you're a fan of the Song of Fire and Ice series, Game of Thrones, or the Gentleman Bastard series, anything like that, there are several different series where authors have contributed an extra story set in their universe that's in this book. Or if you just like roguish characters in general, then I think you would like the collection. I started reading this book back at the beginning of my YouTube channel, long ago. It's nice to finally put a completed check mark on it. If you're wondering why it took me years to finish this one, it's nothing wrong with the book. It's just I wanted to get through the Game of Thrones series before I read the short story from that one. It is up against a book that I read from NetGalley. As always, I like to say thank you to the publisher, the author, everyone involved there with NetGalley to give me a free ebook copy of the book before it actually comes out for the public. I read Pretty Dead Queens by Alexa Dunn. I wanted to support her because she was one of the reasons that I got into BookTube and AuthorTube, having watched her channel years ago, and I've read each of her books. I was happy to read this one as well. It is another murder situation with some young adults. I'm probably not the target audience, but that's okay. And probably because I'm not the target audience, it's not going to win. I'm going to give the win to the Rogues collection, compiled together by George R. R. Martin and Gardner Dozois. Up next, our next bracket, we've got a pairing with another NetGalley book that I read. This one is Dead Man's Hand. It's by James J. Butcher, who is the son of Jim Butcher. Jim Butcher, famous for writing the Dresden Files series. Here, his son, James J. Butcher, is creating his own urban fantasy with his own situation going on. So it was an interesting book to read. It is up against another August of Adventures read for me, which I was super excited to read because after many years of us not getting any sort of Dragonlance novel, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, the original creators of Dragonlance, have returned. They are giving us a new trilogy. This is book one in that trilogy, Dragonlance Destinies trilogy. First book is called Dragons of Deceit. I know a lot of people on BookTube have attempted to read the Dragonlance books, and they thought, well, this is just that kind of silly, campy stuff you get from the early 90s with D&D inspired fiction, that sort of stuff. But I thought, like, this book did a really nice job. The first third of the book is really grounded. It doesn't feel like a campy sort of fantasy. It focuses mostly on one character, her regret that her father died, and she wants to find a way to bring him back. The only real complaint from fans of Dragonlance is they've had time travel storylines before with Tasselhoff, and so some fans are a little disappointed that it's going to involve magic time travel stuff again. But that main character for this book, Destina, she wants to use time travel to save her father's life, bring her father back to life. Out of these two books, I'm picking the Dragonlance book. I enjoyed the way that it set up the trilogy. Even though it's not really a complete story on its own, you get the main character bumbling around trying to put things into place to save her father's life. The next set of books is Prince Lestat by Anne Rice, as I am trying to finish the Vampire Chronicles series. You know, some of my big goals this year were to finish series and to read more books by authors that I like, and I think I've been doing a great job with that. Prince Lestat is the beginning of the final 3 books in the Vampire Chronicles, one last trilogy to send off the series for good. I enjoyed that Lestat as a character was back as a central focus here, even though in true Anne Rice tradition the book takes a lot of detours with other characters and telling their stories. Lestat is at the heart of the book, and ultimately it is about Lestat's journey as he is learning more about the origins of the vampire and, really importantly, what that mysterious power has been behind the Talamasca all these years, because Anne Rice somewhat subtly kept mentioning in a lot of the books, oh, we don't really know who it was that established the Talamasca. We don't really know who those people are. So it was nice to finally confront that head on. It is followed by its sequel, very similarly named, Prince Lestat, and the realms of Atlantis. That's right. Anne Rice went there with the idea of people being concerned about Atlantis, the lost city of Atlantis, mixing that in with the vampire lore. Out of these two books, I'm going to go with the first one in this trilogy, just like book 11 in the Vampire Chronicles, if you don't count the witch books, which I guess would make it 14. It's a lot of books in the series. Prince Lestat is advancing. Then we get down to our last bracket, which is not a full bracket this month. The last book in the Vampire Chronicles, the last book in this trilogy, Blood Communion by Anne Rice, trying to bring it all to a close. I've got that paired with R. St. Clair's book, Women in Trouble. You probably know R. St. Clair from YouTube as Regina St. Clair with her YouTube channel, Regina's Haunted Library. Very entertaining, interesting channel. I highly recommend you check it out. I am really enjoying her books too, so I highly recommend her books. Women in Trouble is a collection of short stories. Various women, some of them cause trouble, some of them are actually in trouble. It's a really neat collection. It starts out with a novella, and then it's followed up by a lot of interesting short stories, some with horrific twists to them. Out of this pairing, I'm going to go with R. St. Clair's book, Women in Trouble. It's advancing. And then after that, we've got a book that is unopposed, The God Engines by John Scalzi. It's been a busy month. The only reason I even got through this many books was because some of them are short story collections, which makes it easier, and I listened to a lot of them as audiobooks, as I did with this one. I love John Scalzi's books. He's very good with coming up with a concept. I think he was at his best with the Old Man's War series, with that concept. The Interdependency trilogy is interesting as well, and then he's got a lot of humorous books with some concepts in them, but they don't always come through the way you want. And this is an example where John Scalzi had an interesting concept, but I guess I expected more out of it. With this, there are god beings, kind of like Thor and Loki from the MCU, where they have physical bodies, and people have them trapped in machines and are using them, as the title implies. They are part of the engine and the power of running the machine. So it is interesting. It's got some interesting ideas with faith and how people treat their god beings and that sort of thing. It's running on a post, so it's automatically advancing. Let's go back up there to the top. Up in the first bracket, we had the Radium Girls win, and we had the DS9 Anthology Prophecy and Change win, so they are now up against one another. The Radium Girls was really sad. I need to caution you. I felt like someone was following me around chopping onions as I read, especially the second half of this book. And I suppose, trigger warning, if you have known people who have suffered and dealt with cancer, this book goes into great detail explaining the pain, the horrible pain, and the doctor's visits, and it's gonna potentially make you really, really sad. So, out of the fact that this book was just so sad, even though it's very serious and I believe people should read it, I'm not going to advance it any further, because the idea is that I am picking my best read of the month, and there was just too much sadness in that book. As an opposite to that, reading the DS9 Anthology, I was smiling the whole time, revisiting characters that I love from the series. So, for that reason alone, Prophecy and Change will get to advance on up, meaning it's going to make it to the semifinals. Our next pairing in the next bracket, we've got Monster Huntress by David Wiley that won, and also the Rogues Collection by George R.R. Martin. And you might be thinking, wow, if there's anyone from the fantasy genre who can derail David Wiley's chances of winning in this battle, it would be George R.R. Martin. But I've got some news for you. You would be wrong if you thought that. I'm advancing David Wiley's book. That is how much that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it even more than getting some random stories set in various universes from these authors. Our next pairing, the next bracket, we've got Dragonlance Destinies, the Dragons of Deceit, up against Prince Lestat by Anne Rice. Both of these are books that are part of a series, long going series, characters being brought back that are fan favorites that people love. For example, in reading Dragons of Deceit, I was smiling a whole lot. Any scene with Tasselhoff, I had forgotten just how much that I will smile and laugh at the antics of that little kinder in the story. story. And I suppose for that reason, it's going to win. Dragons of Deceit is going to defeat the Prince Lestat book. No reason to draw that out any longer. So far, we've got 3 books that have advanced to semifinals. Let's see what the 4th one is. We've got Women in Trouble by R. St. Clair up against The God Engines by John Scalzi. As I was saying earlier, I did see some flaws in the John Scalzi book. It's not necessarily his best. But I would say I suppose now I've read 3 books by R. St. Clair, and I've read her stories in several collections, the HorrorTube anthologies. This did feel like R. St. Clair at her best from what I've read so far, though she does have a book that just came out September 1st, which is Code Red. So maybe that book's going to be even better. But Women in Trouble is advancing to the semifinals. That means if we take a moment to look at semifinals, we've got a Book Trek 2022 book, a DS9 anthology in semifinals, which includes one of my all-time favorite authors and actors and characters with the story about Elam Garrick in there. Then we've got David Wiley's book, Monster Huntress. It reads like classic fiction. It's great. It's an August of Adventures pick as well as a BookTube Spin 7 book for me. We follow that up with another August of Adventures book, the Dragonlance book, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman being some of my favorite authors from my teenage and college years with Dragonlance. And then finally in semifinals, we've got R. St. Clair with Women in Trouble, a great collection of short stories. So going back to the top, Prophecy and Change, the DS9 anthology against Monster Huntress by David Wiley. We've got science fiction up against fantasy. I'm going to give this win to David Wiley because even though I really enjoyed the story by Andrew Robinson in the DS9 collection, not all of the stories were that good overall in the collection. Monster Huntress easily gets the win. David Wiley's book is going to slip right on up there into the finals bracket. And then our other semifinals set, we've got the Dragonlance book against Women in Trouble. Both of these were really enjoyable reads. Ultimately, though, I do have to admit, the Dragonlance books do have, at the end of the day, just kind of this basic level to them where they are fun adventures. I get to laugh along with what the characters are doing, but sometimes the characters do silly, immature things, and you think, maybe this is really written beneath my reading level. Whereas R. St. Clair's book feels that it is written for an adult audience. It is a collection of horror stories with interesting twists, some unexpected things happening, and callbacks to some great classic films and callbacks to what I felt were a lot of great short stories from horror. So there we go. In our finals, we've got David Wiley's book, Monster Huntress Fantasy, up against R. St. Clair's book, which is really mostly a horror collection, Women in Trouble. Here we have 2 people who are both on BookTube, AuthorTube. I really like both of them, their personalities. I really like the writing done by both of them. When it comes time to declare a winner, I can say thank goodness I've still got some wildcard spots because I'm going to call this one a tie. They are both going to win as my best read of the month for August 2022. Since I do them in reading order, that means in putting them in the end of the year battle slots, David Wiley's book Monster Huntress will fall officially in the August slot, and R. St. Clair's book is going to fall into one of those wildcard spots there at the end of the year. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Maybe when I do the end of the year super book battle, they will collide once again. Perhaps I will have to deal with the situation of finally declaring a winner between the 2 of them at the end of December, beginning of January. Who knows? But they are amazing reads. I highly recommend them. As I said earlier, I feel like my reading month was alright, because I had so many great books to read. Hope you had a great reading month as well. Down below, give me your comments. You can let me know what you thought about the book battle. If you were upset about my decisions, feel free to debate with me down there. And I'd love to hear what you've been reading, especially if you don't make your own videos and post about your wrap-ups of what you're reading. Let me know down below. I feel like every day is a good day for a book battle or a book talk. Peace.